After everything that happened, Joe Jaekyung took Kim Dan back to his place. He laid him on the bed, watching as Kim Dan remained completely unconscious, unaware of his surroundings. Joe Jaekyung scoffs. He reeks of booze. What possessed me to bring him here? His gaze sweeps over Kim Dan's disheveled appearance. His clothes are filthy, his skin too pale, his body too thin. What happened to him? Has he been rolling in dirt or what? Joe Jaekyung sighs and starts unbuttoning Kim Dan's shirt. His fingers still, recalling what the grandmother had said. I think he's having trouble sleeping. Joe Jaekyung clicks his tongue, irritation flickering in his expression. Is that why he looks like this? He finishes pulling off the dirty shirt, revealing how skinny Kim Dan has become. A small crease forms between Joe Jaekyung's brows. What exactly is his problem? Joe Jaekyung sighs heavily. Damn it, I'll just sleep outside. He turns toward the door, but then, a weak tug on his shirt. Joe Jaekyung freezes. His eyes widen as he glances down. Kim Dan is gripping his shirt tightly. Joe Jaekyung stops breathing for a second. Kim Dan's fingers tremble, and he's crying. A sharp, painful pull tightens in Joe Jaekyung's chest. Why the hell is he crying? His lips part, but before he can say anything, Kim Dan pulls him down. Joe Jaekyung falls onto the bed, Kim Dan's arms wrapping tightly around him. What the? His body stiffens as Kim Dan clings to him, his breathing ragged, his fingers digging into Joe Jaekyung's back like he's terrified of being left alone. Don't leave me alone. Joe Jaekyung's eyes widen. Don't leave me all alone. His voice cracks, his body's shaking, but he's still asleep. Joe Jaekyung doesn't move. Please don't leave. Kim Dan tightens his grip, pressing his face against Joe Jaekyung's chest, his tears soaking into his skin. Joe Jaekyung doesn't know what to do. His body refuses to push Kim Dan away, but his mind is racing. Is he awake? Kim Dan's face lifts slightly, his half-lidded eyes looking up at Joe Jaekyung, his lips parted as if he's about to say something more. The distance between them shrinks. Joe Jaekyung's breath hitches. Kim Dan is so close. His lips. But then, nothing happens. Kim Dan simply tightens his embrace, burying himself into Joe Jaekyung's warmth. Joe Jaekyung stares down at him, his heart hammering in his chest. What the hell is this? His arms hover awkwardly in the air, unsure if he should push Kim Dan away or pull him closer. Is this a joke? Joe Jaekyung swallows, his throat suddenly dry. Hey, get up, will you? No response. Joe Jaekyung grits his teeth. You're not really asleep, are you? He tries to pull away, but Kim Dan's legs lock around him, refusing to let him go. Joe Jaekyung exhales sharply, frustration and something else he refuses to name creeping into his voice. Damn drunk. A bitter chuckle escapes him. So, you're always this annoying when you drink. He stares at Kim Dan's sleeping face, his grip relaxing just slightly. He looks so fragile. Joe Jaekyung's eyes darken. What the hell happened to you, Kim Dan? The next morning, Kim Dan wakes up in warmth. His brows knit together as he slowly blinks himself awake. He frowns, his body shifting slightly. It's so warm. His mind feels hazy, like he's trying to piece something together. Then, a presence. His breath catches. He turns his head, and his entire body goes rigid. Joe Jaekyung is sleeping next to him. Kim Dan's heart stops. His eyes widen, and before he even registers his own movement, he bolts upright. The sudden motion jerks Joe Jaekyung awake. His eyes snap open, irritation flashing across his face. Damn it. He rubs his face, looking up at Kim Dan. What the hell? You scared me. Kim Dan is staring at him in disbelief. What am I doing here? His voice is tight, almost panicked. Then his eyes drop to his bare chest. His stomach sinks. Why am I undressed? Don't tell me. Joe Jaekyung clicks his tongue. Don't get ahead of yourself. Nothing happened. Kim Dan's body remains tense. Joe Jaekyung sighs, leaning back against the pillow, his voice flat. You really don't know your own symptoms, huh? Kim Dan blinks, confused. What symptoms? Joe Jaekyung stares at him, his expression unreadable. You got shit-faced yesterday, then wandered outside in your sleep. Kim Dan's lips part slightly. Sleepwalking? Yeah. I found you in the middle of the damn street and brought you back. Kim Dan feels his throat dry up. Joe Jekyung stretches, his voice casual, but his eyes too sharp. And then you started crying and begging me not to leave. Kim Dan stiffens. His face pales. I did what? Joe Jekyung smirks slightly, but it doesn't reach his eyes. Yeah. Kim Dan looks away, his fists clenching in the sheets. Joe Jekyung scoffs. You'd think you'd be a little more grateful after everything I did. Kim Dan's expression darkens. Don't do that again. Joe Jekyung's brows furrow. What? Kim Dan exhales slowly. I don't want you to do that anymore. His voice is quiet, but the weight in it hits Joe Jekyung harder than he expects. A strange feeling twists in his chest, but before he can say anything, Kim Dan stands up. I'm sorry for causing you trouble yesterday. Joe Jekyung watches as Kim Dan walks toward the door. I'm going now. Joe Jekyung's expression darkens. He grits his teeth, irritation flaring up sharply. What? Not even a little thank you. Kim Dan doesn't look back. Joe Jekyung grabs a pillow and hurls it at the door just as it slams shut. Damn it. I must have been out of my damn mind. His fingers dig into the sheets. I should have just left him out there. But even as he says it, the memory of Kim Dan's tear-streaked face, his trembling voice, his desperate grip, won't leave his mind. Joe Jekyung exhales sharply. Damn it. Joe Jekyung grits his teeth, his fingers tightening in frustration. Taking me for a fool just because I've been soft on him. His phone buzzes, breaking his thoughts. A message. Hey, Joe Jekyung. If you're free today, can you drop by the gym? We've got a backlog of paperwork. His eyes narrow. For the first time in weeks, he considers going back. Joe Jekyung finally decides to leave for Seoul. As he walks into the gym, the coach glances up. That's the last of it. Good work. Joe Jekyung barely nods, his mind somewhere else. Could you look into finding a hospital? The coach's voice makes him pause. A hospital? Joe Jekyung's expression hardens. Yeah, it's not for me. The coach raises a brow, but doesn't press. Joe Jekyung exhales sharply. We're done here, right? I'm off then. As he turns to leave. Wait, Joe Jekyung. The coach's voice is steady, concerned. I don't know what you've been up to lately, but instead of being alone all the time, why not come back to the gym? Joe Jekyung stiffens. If you're not ready to return, take more time. But it's not like you to be gone this long. Joe Jekyung says nothing. Memories of Kim Dan, his sleepwalking, his trembling hands, his exhausted face flood his mind. It's not time yet. His voice is firm. But I've got it under control. Don't worry about me. Without another word, he leaves. Back at his apartment, Joe Jekyung sits alone. The silence is loud. He looks down at the gift Kim Dan once gave him. He's still keeping it, even after everything. His mind replays Kim Dan's voice, raw and pleading. Don't leave me alone. Joe Jekyung exhales sharply. He keeps getting in my head. He shakes his head. Even if you dig your heels in, it won't do any good. In the end, it'll all go my way. He stands up. Decision made. Joe Jekyung storms into the countryside once again. Kim Dan barely has time to react before he's lifted off the ground. Put me down. Kim Dan struggles. You can't just pick someone up like this. Joe Jekyung doesn't stop. Stop struggling. The old man watches, amused. Why are you making such a fuss on the weekend? Are you going somewhere? Joe Jekyung's grip tightens. I'm taking this guy to a hospital in Seoul. Kim Dan freezes. A hospital? The words barely leave his lips before he's thrown into the car. Joe Jekyung slams the door and locks it. I'm not sick. Let me out. Joe Jekyung's voice is firm, unreadable. You think I want to do this? Your grandma asked me to take care of you. If you don't get help, you might end up biting the dust in this little town. Kim Dan's body tenses. Grandma? Joe Jekyung looks at him seriously. That's right. So shut up. Kim Dan falls silent. The long drive to Seoul begins. At the hospital, Kim Dan sits in the examination room. Jo Jaekyung watches from the side, arms crossed. The doctor's words make Kim Dan tense. His eyes widen. Really? Jo Jaekyung's brows furrow. Kim Dan doesn't say anything else. But the look on his face, it's not good news.